Hello, good morning. We are in the library of the Museum of the Second World War in Gdańsk. With me are Timem Flackiem and Hal Evans of Cambridge University, who have come to us to take part in the cryptology weekend devoted to the code-breaking issues and, of course, the methods of breaking the notorious German Enigma cipher machine. Gentlemen, I'm going to ask you a few questions about your work and about the code-breaking methods, and starting with the question about the Polish side of the wartime code breaking. In the so-called general knowledge, especially in the Western cultural sphere, the Polish efforts to break Enigma codes are rather obscure. You would say that if somebody wants to connect Enigma machine with someone, it would be inevitably Alana Turinga and Bletchley Park. Why interest in the Polish methods then?
Shall I start with this? Okay. Well, you're absolutely right. I'm a fellow at King's College in Cambridge, where Alan Turing was a fellow. And so on a trip to Milton Keynes, I didn't know anything much about Bletchley Park, but I thought it would be, I looked on the internet for things to do while I was in Milton Keynes, and going to visit Bletchley Park was highly recommended. So I went there, and indeed all you find out about is Gordon Welshman, Alan Turing, very famous people at Bletchley Park. But I bought a little book by a chap called Frank Carter, and it was called On the First Breaking of the Enigma. And I read through this book, and there I learned Marian Rejewski, Henryk Zagalski, Jerzy Ruski. I hadn't seen any of that at Bletchley Park, and I was amazed to find that, in fact, it wasn't the British cryptographers, it was the Polish cryptographers that were responsible for deducing the wiring of all the rotors in the Enigma, the reflecting drum, and for coming up with methods to determine the daily keys. And that was just an incredible discovery. And then I realised that where was the credit for this? And so that's what sparked the interest in me, was the link back via Alan Turing to my college where I'm a fellow, but then realising that you know, there just wasn't enough credit being given, if you like, to people just didn't know about this. People have seen the film The Imitation Game, and from that you'd be given the impression it was all British, when clearly, you know, we relied an awful lot on the work that the Polish Cipher Bureau carried out.
If I remember correctly, the movie, the only mention of Poles is that the bomb itself was based on an aerial Polish machine, but that's about one short sentence. And what's your story with the code breaking?
It's similar for myself, actually. I grew up being very interested in both the engineering and historical aspects. And so the Enigma code was kind of a perfect match for those two things. And so I grew up reading quite a few fiction and non-fiction books sort of regarding that area, and particularly the Second World War was of interest to me in the historical era. So it was a similar thing for me growing up. I hadn't had an appreciation or knowledge around the Polish efforts. And it was only, in fact, during my time studying at Cambridge University in my fourth year during my master's project, during my master's course, there's half the year is based around a project. Dr. Timem Flackiem here was advertising a project that was in relation to Enigma, and it was prior to the Second War, and read into it a bit and realised there's a lot of interesting information that's during the late 1920s and 1930s, prior to the Second War, which I didn't know about. And I think upon reading that, it was only of interest, and to discover there's these machines that were the very first ones that broke the Enigma code. And I thought that's fascinating, and from there, it was just from that point, yes, I wanted to learn more.
With me, it's actually a very similar story. I think it was in David Kahn's book that was mentioned something which is, in retrospect, quite obvious, but I think Poles were the first to have realized that since machine code requires, well, is a problem of mathematical proportions, if I may use this kind of simile, you require mathematicians to break those codes. So they groomed a team of mathematicians, and then they were the first to use machines to break machines. And what's your assessment of Polish code breaking methods, if you can provide one at this stage?
incredibly creative. The German High Command believed that the Enigma was unbreakable, basically because you can set it up in so many different ways. At the time when Marian Rejewski and the Cipher Bureau, the Polish Cipher Bureau, were working on the code, the Germans used 6 plugboard leads. They used to swap pairs of letters over. But even with only 6 leads, they later went to 10 leads. There were something like 7 billion ways that you could reconfigure the Enigma machine. So the Germans were completely confident that no one would ever be able to break in and listen to their, top secret communications. So the achievement of being able to break the Enigma, not just in terms of the daily keys, but also being able to deduce the wiring, because the original Enigmas were used for commercial things like banking transactions and the like. The German High Command modified the commercial Enigmas to make them a much higher standard of security, and so I, not just me, plenty of other historians and so on, think it's the greatest cryptological challenge in ever, really, for the Poles to actually deduce how the Enigma worked, how it was wired up, and then to work out how to find the one of 7 billion daily keys, that were changed.
I got to tell you that I've read the description of how it was made, how Rejewski spent his New Year's Eve to provide a breakthrough. And I've read it many times, and I have to admit that I have big trouble understanding it. It's higher mathematics, and I try not to sound it like black magic, but it would seem that it was quite brilliant. And yes, but you can also say that the Germans knew about the story of Room 17, British Admiralty, and about the code breaking, how their codes were transparent to the Allies during the First World War. So it prompted them to provide something supposedly unbreakable, so much complicated that it could be broken. So why Cyklometr then? There are other machines that were created, other machines that were used. Of course, you know about the reconstruction of the Turing-Welchman bomb in Bletchley Park. So why have you chosen Cyklometr, not, for example, the first bomb itself?
The cyclometer was the first electromechanical device. See, in my job as an academic, I have to offer fourth-year projects for students like Hal to take on, and I thought it was doable in the time frame, only just, and we probably need to get help to complete the job, but I thought it would make a good fourth-year project. The Polish bomber, which came after the cyclometer, was a much more complicated, it was actually a moving device, so I felt it would be a harder project. Now, I did offer it as a project, but not trying to recreate it faithfully. So perhaps Hal should talk a bit about that. The student that worked on the Polish bomber, he did a modern take, like he printed everything using laser cutters and using acrylic and so on. Hal's idea was to be as faithful as possible to anything that you could find in Rejewski's memoirs about materials that were used and so on. Hal, perhaps you should speak a bit about this, because I'm taking up too much of the bandwidth here.
Not at all. I think for me, yes, it was the realization that this was the very first electromechanical device used to break the Enigma code, and so from that point, it felt like this. Given that, to our knowledge at least, there's no evidence or no physical cyclometers that exist in the world. It only felt fitting to be able to try and recreate this machine as faithful to the original as we possibly could.
Well, there probably are some remains of Polish devices, but they were buried somewhere currently, which is in Ukraine, when the Cipher Bureau was evacuating from Poland in 1939 in September. So probably somebody have already found it, but it must be, completely rusty and unrecognizable, possibly. And how long did it take to recreate the machine? How many people worked over it? Because, well, with modern technologies, I'm aware that those devices, when they were first built in 1930s in Poland, they were extremely costly. they had to maintain secrecy, and for example, the construction of the first bomb consumed most of the yearly budget of the whole Cipher Bureau. So how was it for Cambridge University? Was it very costly, time-consuming? Or is the 21st century technology so advanced that it's easier?
It was, so in terms of start to finish, it took a little over a year from sort of commencing the project until getting a finished replica. But that involved within tens of people in terms of its manufacture, so various third parties, and also the Cambridge Engineering Workshop Department, and there are several members in there who made various parts, and then myself included as well. But despite, well, we tried to make the cyclometer replica as faithful to the original as possible, but sort of within reason. So we might utilise some modern day manufacturing techniques while trying to utilise old-fashioned materials where possible. But despite that, and despite the utilisation of, say, CNC machining techniques these days, it was still a phenomenal number of human hours to build the machine. And indeed, the parts required for the cyclometer, somewhat in many respects, some of the parts are somewhat similar to an Enigma machine. They are they're very intricate, and often the manufacturing techniques that would have been used previously, they take quite a lot of setup hours to get to produce, say, the molds for sand casting, all that sort of thing. And so to produce just one using a sand casting method is a large amount of time. So there were quite a few human hours involved in the manufacture of the cyclometer replica.
Fascinating, really. And is, cyclometer somehow useful in day-to-day activities of the university? Do you use it in some classes for presentations?
I think it's not useful in the sense of modern code breaking. Everything the cyclometer, you can write software to do it these days, but it is very useful to inspire the next generation of students to think engineering and mathematics are things that they might get interested in and take to a higher level. So it's great in things like outreach events where you bring students from sixth form colleges who are thinking about what to do at university next, what's their next step. And also students who think that mathematics is very abstract and has no application. And then you can say, look, the people that invented permutation theory, they didn't have any idea what it was used for. It was just abstract, pure mathematics. And then Marian Rejewski and his colleagues in the Polish Cipher Bureau found an application for permutation theory that basically changed the course of the Second World War. So here you are, here's mathematics in the real world, finding applications that no one dreamt of at the time. So it's very useful from the point of view of inspiring people, for telling the story of the past and sort of bringing it to life, but not useful for sort of modern cryptography or modern research, I guess.
So it means I will be always sorry that in my secondary school nobody had thought of such way of presenting mathematics to me. I was notoriously bad at mathematics, unfortunately, because of abstraction, I think.
Yeah.
I always wanted to say that I don't really care about the answer because
what's the point?
Yeah, what's the point?
Yeah,
exactly. Okay, so my next question would be, are you planning, for example, to bring this machine to Poland and provide some kind of a occasion for a Polish audience to see it in action?
I'd love to do that. It's big, heavy, and at the moment, because there's only one of them, we believe, in the world, I feel very nervous about. I've put it in the boot of my car and taken it to Oxford University and Bletchley Park, and we took it down to London to the Polish Hearth Club in Exhibition Road, where we gave a talk about it. But that feels safe, just putting it in your car. Taking it by aeroplane or couriering it, I just worry about it. I'd love to do it. Carol and I did talk about, could we possibly find a way to bring it here for the talk that we'll be giving tomorrow, but in the end we decided the best thing is to for me to make some short video clips, and we'll show those, but I would love to do it. Yeah.
Well, I can relate to that perfectly, because the Enigma machine that we have here in the exhibition, I've brought it with my colleagues, myself from Oslo. It was donated by the Military Museum in Oslo, and we did it exactly this way. We put it in the trunk of a car and brought it by car, because we were not really trusting any shipping company or airplanes in that. So I can relate to that perfectly. Okay, so the final question, I think, would be, are you perhaps planning of any further reconstructions of special code-breaking paraphernalia machines or tools that were used, or was it a one-time project?
I would love, as a retirement project, to reconstruct the Polish bomber. Again, that feels possible, but it would be, because it's basically 6 stacks of Enigma, getting hold of, being able to manufacture all those rotors and so on, it would be a case of finding some funding, outsourcing some of the component manufacturing. I've already run a project to recreate the Zygalski sheets, but not in the way that they made them, which was to cardboard, razor blade, cut 1,000 holes, each one with 4 little slits. Just using laser engravers to do it. So it's not quite the real thing. I'd love to try to recreate the bomber as accurately as possible. What do you think, Hal, about the possibility of making some more cyclometers? Because you've still got all the drawings and the plans. And
yes, I mean, it would be I would love to do it if the opportunity ever arose. I think all the designs. So in order to design the blueprints, if you like, of the replica cyclometer, use CAD software to develop it from the scratch up, and so they all exist. We've got all the measurements and what you'd need to manufacture it against. That's probably a sort of third of the work that was in that year that I mentioned before. So it would definitely be possible to manufacture again, but I think the limiting factor most certainly is the cost in terms of human hours to be able to reproduce it. Particularly, I think that a very large proportion of time would be involved with regard to the rotors. So in our project, we were very fortunate to be able to outsource the manufacture of the rotors and reflectors to a specialist machinist in Germany.
Sorry.
It's highly ironic, isn't it?
It's somewhat ironic. And likewise, a few other parts actually sourced from specialist suppliers in Germany as well, ironically. But if we were need to do, again, if you're looking at a replica cyclometer, again, we needed 6 rotors and 2 reflectors, and so that would be a sort of obstacle to overcome, if you like. And it's most certainly possible to manufacture themselves, but yourselves, but there would be significant number of human hours involved in that. They're very intricate things, and particularly if we're trying to manufacture the rotors faithfully, it's quite complex manufacturing techniques, even in the 21st century, utilising materials like Zamac or Bakelite.
Well, nobody really knows how to do it anymore. It's like repairing a grand piano, I think, something more complicated than that, but requiring a very special set of skills.
Cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
So, well, I salute your work then, if you wanted to create the interior as faithful as possible, because it's fairly easy to do it well on the outside and then just to put some modern things inside, but to recreate everything, that's, well, I salute your work then. Gentlemen, thank you very much then for this nice talk. I'm very happy that we are having you here today and for the cryptology weekend, which is still before us when we are speaking. I can assume that tomorrow your lecture will spark much interest and perhaps some questions from the audience, and we are hoping to see you again sometime, perhaps with the cyclometer, the one that you've made or the one that perhaps will be made again. And thank you for your answers.
Thank you very much for having us. We're honoured to be here.
Thank you.